Daryl pulled his modest SUV into the parking lot of Prestige Motors, the luxury dealership he had recently acquired in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. The desert heat shimmered off the gleaming vehicles parked outside, their polished surfaces glowing under the afternoon sun. With deliberate intent, he parked in an unmarked spot at the back of the lot, stepped out, and took a moment to survey the dealership. The facade, though impressive, held little interest for him. It was the inside operations, how the staff interacted, and the dynamics behind the scenes that would give him insight into the true character of the business. Dressed casually in a worn gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, Daryl wasn't trying to attract attention. He wanted to experience the dealership without the staff knowing their new boss was in the building. As he walked toward the entrance, he noticed a few employees chatting near the front desk. Their laughter was light, but he sensed the subtle shift when they noticed him. The air grew heavier, the casual conversation winding down as he entered. Inside, the showroom was a stark contrast to the heat outside. Cool air, the faint smell of leather, and fresh wax filled the space. Rows of pristine cars gleamed under the bright lights. The employees' glances flicked to his casual outfit and back to their tasks, and the atmosphere shifted. Daryl caught it all, but he remained calm, observing without judgment. Yet, from across the showroom, a woman approached him. Susan was middle-aged with sharp features and an air of authority that her tailored blazer and polished heels amplified. A clipboard under her arm completed the image of someone who valued efficiency. She walked towards him with purpose, her heels clicking on the polished floor. But her smile, though polite, didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," Susan said, her voice cool and professional. "Can I help you with something?" Daryl offered a relaxed smile. "Just here to look around," he replied, gesturing to the cars casually. Susan's gaze narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing her face as she scanned his appearance. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, the edge in her voice unmistakable. "Something like that," Daryl responded, keeping his tone even. Amused by the question, Susan's smile tightened. "We cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our vehicles require pre-qualification." Her words carried a subtle dismissal. Daryl caught the tone, but didn't let it faze him. "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Susan's face betrayed a moment of surprise before she regained her composure. "I'm just trying to save you time," she said quickly. "These cars start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to a dealership with more budget-friendly options." Daryl's smile didn't change, but internally, he noted her assumption. He wasn't fazed, but the interaction stung. "Quite the assumption," he said softly. There was a brief, tense silence as Susan processed his words. She recovered quickly, though, walking away to gather options. Daryl turned to one of the silver cars, brushing his hand across its polished surface. His reflection met him in the sleek body of the coupe, and he allowed himself a quiet moment of contemplation. When Susan returned, clipboard in hand, her forced smile was even more strained. "I've compiled a few options that might suit your situation," she said, handing him a list of pre-owned cars. Daryl scanned the list briefly. Used sedans, older SUVs, compact hybrids, all cars well below the dealership's usual offerings. His lips twitched, a hint of amusement threatening to show, but he kept his cool, tucking the paper into his pocket. "Appreciate the effort," he said. Susan stiffened. "Listen, I'm just being realistic with you," she said, her tone dropping as if she was confiding a secret. "Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Daryl met her gaze, his voice steady. "And what makes you think I'm not your target customer?" For a moment, Susan hesitated, the words catching in her throat. She seemed momentarily uncertain, but quickly recovered. "I've been doing this a long time," she said, her voice clipped. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." "Out of my depth?" Daryl repeated, feigning thoughtfulness. "Interesting." Susan's face tightened with impatience, but Daryl didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice low, but unwavering. "How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan's eyes widened. "The owner?" she repeated, caught off guard. "That's not possible today," she said, an edge creeping into her tone. "The owner doesn't drop by for casual visits." Daryl smiled faintly. "Maybe you could give them a call. Let them know I'm here. I think they'll want to meet me." Susan's smile grew thin as she felt the tension shift. She seemed on the verge of losing patience. But before she could argue, Daryl pulled out his phone and casually began scrolling through his contacts. "What are you doing?" Susan demanded. "Just calling the owner." Daryl replied calmly. "Shouldn't take long." She blinked, her irritation now mixing with confusion as she watched him make the call. As he spoke, a few of the employees stopped what they were doing. Their curiosity piqued. Daryl paused for a moment, holding up a finger to signal that he was almost done. After ending the call, he slipped his phone back into his pocket and turned back to Susan. "They'll be here shortly," he said simply. The room felt charged with tension. Susan, now fully confused, shifted uneasily. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Minutes passed, and just as the silence grew unbearable, the main doors of the showroom opened. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit stepped inside, his presence commanding the room's attention. His calm, friendly smile landed immediately on Daryl. "Mr. Carter," the man said, extending his hand toward Daryl. "Good to see you." Daryl returned the handshake, a small smile forming on his lips. "Thanks for coming, Alex. Appreciate it." The entire room seemed to stiffen, Susan's clipboard nearly slipping from her hands as she looked between Daryl and Alex. The confusion was evident on her face. "Mr. Carter?" Susan echoed, her voice faltering. Alex turned to her, his demeanor professional but firm. "I see you've already met Mr. Carter," he said. His tone shifted as he addressed Susan. "Susan, I believe you weren't aware that Daryl here is the new owner of Prestige Motors." The realization hit Susan like a ton of bricks. She stood frozen, her face pale as the truth sank in. I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't know that." Daryl interrupted gently. "It's fine, Susan. Really." He took a step forward. "But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would you have treated me any differently?" Susan opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence in the showroom was deafening. Daryl nodded, as though her silence had answered the question for him. Turning to Alex, he said, "Let's gather everyone in the conference room. I think it's time we had a little chat about how things are run around here." The tension in the room was palpable as the employees followed Daryl into the conference room. Once everyone was seated, Daryl addressed the group, his voice calm but firm. "For those of you who don't know, I'm Daryl Carter, the new owner of Prestige Motors." The staff's reactions ranged from shock to embarrassment as the news sank in. "I came here today dressed casually for a reason," Daryl continued. "I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel walking through these doors." He let the words sink in before continuing. "What I experienced today was disappointing. I was judged not for what I could bring to the table, but for how I looked." Daryl's gaze swept over the room. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who walks through those doors, every customer who doesn't fit into someone's preconceived notion of what a luxury car buyer looks like."